Well, good Monday morning, everyone. I am David, and I am your chaplain here at Progressive, and this is this week's Monday's Motivation. Good morning. I am sitting in what will eventually become Love Now Community Church's home. And many of you know that I am a full-time pastor as well as your chaplain. And I pastor a church called Love Now Community Church, and we're coming up on 5 years. And for three of those 5 years, almost 3 of those 5 years, we have been praying that God would lead us to a place that we could have a more permanent home. We've been in a couple different locations, and those have been great. We've loved those, but it's not home, right? And when I look at this place and all the construction that's going on around here, man, all I can think of is that God is just good. He is so gracious to us that He hasn't given up on us. He's had a plan for this church before the church even became a church, and before God ever put that into my heart to do this. Well, that makes me think of our text this morning in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. Did you know that it's not just for a church that God has a plan, but God has a plan for your life, a specific plan for your life. In fact, Paul is writing to these Christians in Ephesus, and it was needed for them back then, and it's definitely needed for us today, and it's needed for you today. In verses 8 through 10, this is what Paul says. He says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." Paul says, your salvation is not your own. I mean, none of our good works could ever earn or buy us favor or a spot in heaven with God. And in fact, we're alienated from Him. In verses 1 through 3 in the same chapter, that's what Paul's talking about. He says, you're dead in your sin. Sin is not a disease. It's not an ailment that needs to be cured. It's not that something that will kill you. It already has claimed your spiritual life. You are dead apart from Christ, Paul says. But then he goes on, he says, but God, who is rich in mercy, whose very nature is mercy, has made you alive in Christ. And he goes on in verse 8, it says, this is not your doing. It's not that God saw something in you and said, man, David, he's going to be a great pastor or a great father or whatever, and so I got to save him. That's not what God did that for. God saved me because of His grace, Paul says. And I can't boast about that. The only thing that I can boast in that, Paul says, is of who Jesus is and of God's grace. And so he goes on and he says, it's the purpose of God's grace at work in our life and the purpose of God's salvation is that so that we would do good works. Now, a lot of people confuse this. A lot of people think that we can work our way to God, that we have this big set of this checklist, and if I go to church every day, or if I say the right prayers at the right time every day, or if I give enough money at this time or in this way, then those things are like climbing up a mountain to God. But that mountain is unreachable. The top, the summit, we can't reach, and you will die trying. And so what we needed a God who would come off the mountain to us. And that's what we have in Jesus, in this grace. Because we can't boast about that. Jesus came to us. And in this, there's this purpose that our good works can't get us to God, but they do matter. Because as God transforms and changes our life, we should live like we've been changed, right? And so Paul says, for we are His workmanship. That's a word that's talking about artisticness. This idea is like a tapestry. I mean, if you see a tapestry on an old building or in another church or something, on the front, the picture you're seeing is beautiful. I mean, it's just this work of art. But if you were to flip that tapestry over, what do you see? Man, you just see a bunch of mess, right? You see chaos, strings going everywhere. It's a distorted picture. Well, that's like our life. I mean, we have this distorted picture, really, and then God comes around and He comes into our life and He changes that. And so he's making this beautiful image, this beautiful picture of who he is that others can see. And our good works are like avenues that God's grace is displayed, is put on display in a way in our life. You know, this good works, the things that we do, they don't have to be super spiritual. Paul's talking about this in everyday life. The fact that you are in your office right now, if you are in Christ, you are not there by accident. God has put you there to display who He is through your work. Where you are on the job site, what position you have in this company, if you are in Christ, that is not an accident. God has placed you there before the foundation of the world. He decided that you would be where you are going to be right now so that you would display the grace of God at work in your life and how you do your job. Now, if that doesn't make you want to work extra hard this week or extra motivated this week, that the God of the universe not only, chapter 1, chose you before the foundation of the world, but chapter 2 decided that I want to use you and to do these good works that He has prepared in advance for you specifically to do. If that doesn't motivate you to want to love God and love people in your job, I don't know what will. Well, I hope you guys will think about these things and have an awesome, a safe, and a productive work week.